Okay, in today's lecture, we are going to talk about the one of the again most important aspect of oceanography lecture series. That's the what are the major issues with our marine environment or the ocean. We know that the ocean has a lot of issues. Since we have discussed some of the things earlier as well, but so far by what you understand, I think we are not doing anything good for the ocean. Whatever we do actually bad for the ocean. So because of that, the ocean is really in a difficult situation. There is a saying that the future of the ocean and ours is not different, right? So the future of the ocean is our future as well. So if ocean going to be sick, so we will be sick as well. So if ocean is functioning, it's not functioning well, which means we won't function well as well. So because the most of the processes in the earth actually governed or controlled in the ocean. So without the ocean, there won't be even life actually. So it's very important that we keep the ocean healthy, but there is no any sign of a healthy ocean. So that's why we need to think of a lot. We have to not only think, we really need to act even the smallest thing that we can do, we have to do because the ocean is that danger. Okay, so by now we know that there are so many different types of ecosystem in our on our earth, especially in the around the oceans. And when it comes to Sri Lanka, since we are an island nation, we have a lot of diverse coastal communities, coastal ecosystems. So, but most of these coastal ecosystems actually have a lot of issues, from plastic waste to the ecosystem damages, pollution, invasive species, too much of resources harvesting like fishing, too much, and tourism, especially whale watching, and top of that, the oil pollution and a lot of other different types of pollution and other ship accidents, like what we happened very recently with the Express Pearl, uh, polluting in different ways from pollutants to microplastic. Likewise, there are so many issues in the marine environment. Right? So if you uh, consider the marine environment, there are a lot of threats, and we need to have a lot of involvement as well, because there are so many stresses in the marine environment. So we need to understand as well as we have to act. Right? Some of the issues are listed here, from like high temperatures, sea level rises, like those lots of predators, especially if we are taking too much of predators, because most of the fish that we eat, like all the big fish from sharks, tuna, billfishes, herring, so most of they are actually top predators. We are taking too many predators out of the ocean. We know that these fish are part of the marine food chain. If you are removing the top predators, there will be a huge imbalance in the marine environment. Um, and that will really disrupt the whole food webs in the marine environment. That's right. We have to consider fish as a wildlife. So they are not just for us to eat. They are part of the marine food web, and the top predators, like many cases, they can be the keystone species. You know the term, the keystone species. So if you remove this keystone, so we can think of the future, right? So I'm happy that you selected this course, Aquatic Resources Management, and you follow the oceanography as a subject, because there are a lot of things to learn. Some are very practical and some are very much affecting your own life, our own life actually. So we need to have a better understanding. Unfortunately, our educational system less chance for us to learn about the marine environment, as I'm telling most of the time. But you have made a very good decision, I think. You have made a very good choice of like learning this. Just a fraction of students in the country have some chance at least to learn about the ocean. So you are so different from most of the, at least the graduates even in Sri Lanka. Right. So many issues actually we won't be able to cover in our lecture series, but I will just go through some of the key issues here. It can be very complicated, right? In different areas in the marine environment, we'll have different issues. Like some of the issues will be direct, but most of the issues may be indirect. Like if you put too much of nutrient, it's a marine pollutant. Also, it can be a nutrient for some, but for some it is a pollutant. Like it's extremely bad for coral reefs, too much of nutrient, but it's good for the plankton. At the same time, if it is favorable to the plankton, they will start growing in large numbers, and eventually that also dangerous. It can cause something called the eutrophication, and eutrophication will result in too many plankton, and then even the other bottom level species will be increased, and they will utilize a lot of oxygen, and eventually they all die. What we call the oxygen depleted zones or hypoxia, and I'll come to that on this. You see, some can be affected different ways in the ocean, so these things we need to discuss. And you might have heard about something called Sustainable Development Goal. Pirasara Samvardhana Ilakka නැත්නම් අරමුණු. So these are very important. There are 17 goals set by United Nations. It's actually voluntary things, but since we are signatory to the United Nations, or we are party, a country as a part, so we have a responsibility to respond to these global goals. So we have to go with these goals. In this global goals, number 14 is the life below water. Actually, there was a document, actually, it's called the Sustainable Sri Lanka Vision and a Strategic Path, prepared by a presidential expert committee in about 5 years back, 4 years. I was actually part of this. So we recognize what are the key issues in the marine environment. These are the listed issues. The marine debris as the top issue, the plastic in particular, the marine biosecurity or the invasive species in the marine environment, then the fisheries or overexploitation, or it's not only overexploitation but using illegal fishing gear and destructive fishing gear, the oil spills, the eutrophication. The others are the coastal erosion, water pollution, and the global warming and acidification. Since they are still, we are in a state of understanding, but ocean warming is well recognized all over the world. So these are some of the things that we need to think of. And some of the assessment, these are a little bit old, actually, more than 10 years now. In the Indian Ocean, these are the key issues that has been identified then in 2010. That's nutrient as one of the key issues. It's a severe issue. Then high temperatures. The ocean acidification is not that high, but that's the situation. But it's extremely important. I'll come to this one later on. The impact on the marine fauna. It was moderate earlier, but I think definitely now it is a severe situation. And shipping related issues and the ballast water. I'll come to the ballast water later. So you see, most of the issues are in a severe situation now. And if you start from the marine debris or the plastics, I don't want to go into details since I think we have discussed this. Even we did a webinar on this. So some of the slides are from that webinar as well. So I'll quickly go through these things. Most of you would have been in that webinar as well. So we are extensively using plastic. Of course, plastic now, I mean, now part of our life. We cannot avoid plastic, but plastic causing a lot of issues in the marine environment. So, as for the definition, plastic are any persistent, manufactured or processed solid material discarded, disposed, or abandoned in the marine and coastal environment. So as per that, if you throw something like a solid seed, or even like if you throw some dead fish into the marine environment, it is not a debris. So they should be persistent, manufactured or processed. Like, like a, if a tree branch, the branch of a tree is flowing into the sea, it's not a debris. But like if you cut and process wood, like a furniture, if it is going to, if it is make it way to the sea, then it becomes a marine debris. So that's the difference. Not all solid material uh, going to be a marine debris. So you need to know that one. The problem with these plastics that is they are extremely persistent. Most of the plastic they can be live longer than us. They can, like we see even the the fishing buoys, boya or the the uniform, they can stay more than 50 years. This beverage can, they can stay how many, 200 years to 400 years sometimes. Disposable diapers for 450 years. At several generations, plastic bottle can be stay on Earth for several generations. So even the fishing nets, 600 years, right? So imagine, and this plastic debris, it's not only like a marine pollutant, but I mean, even aesthetically, I mean, just to look at the marine environment is extremely bad. These are some of the images from well over some of the marine environments. The bottom one is after the express berth. So, and they are causing a lot of issues, not only in the marine environment, but even in the other areas that impact on the wildlife. Right? This huge pile of marine debris, or these are not really marine debris, but it is solid waste in this stage, covering even the water channels and extremely um, uh, disturbing the coastal environment. Right? So, but the other issues, we see the most of our solid waste management, plastic also comes consider under the solid waste, and they dump in the open yard. With the heavy rains, with the floods, there are a lot of chance for them to get into the sea. So that's the big issue because they are not well managed within our system. And now recent express pearl issue added a huge amount of microplastics and other plastic into the environment, which is another accidental discharge, which is considered as one the highest single event resulted in the microplastic emission in anywhere in the world. So we need to think of the consequences, right? So these plastics, I have experience in many different situations. Like these are all my photographs took in different environment. Like if you are going around in the lagoons, this is in the Nigambu Lagoon, you are just enjoying the marine environment, but you don't understand what is underneath. Like just under these trees, this is how they look like. Just outside the Nigambu Lagoon, you see some abandoned fishing nets. The problem, they are called the delirated fishing gear. They keep on catching fish because they can be caught in these nets for some of them can be several generations, they can be like that because they are not going to degrade for many years. Right? These mangroves, how they are affected by the plastics, and then this is 22 meters deep in the Nigambu, just outside Nigambu in one of the shipwrecks. You see the plastics. It's everywhere, wherever we go. Even the coral reefs are badly damaged with this, mostly the fishing gear and other plastics. Even the fish traps in the marine, that's posing a lot of issues. And since we are not really managing these plastics in the marine, in the terrestrial environment, that they are ended up in the coastal belt, mostly they are mismanaged, and the large amount of this plastic ended up in the sea as the marine debris or mismanaged waste. And that's where Sri Lanka became among top 5 countries in the world in terms of we are discharging this, what we call the mismanaged plastic into to the coastal waters or to the ocean. So we are in the top 5. So it is true there is a problem with this data and how they calculated this. But anyway, it doesn't mean that we are doing good. We don't even consider plastic as a like marine debris is not a part of our even a category of waste. It's just a solid waste. But we do a lot with the plastic. Now earlier we talked about these plastics, but recently only scientists understand that plastic, when they break into a smaller and smaller, they're going to cause a lot of issues, even harm than the macroplastics, what we call the microplastics. So, but there are different scales, like anything below 0.2 millimeters per nano. The micro is 0.3 to 5 millimeter. That's why the expel per the nurdles, plastic nurdles, or the virgin material used for the plastic production. The condition is considered as micro because almost nearly 5 millimeter, or a little less than 5 meters. That's why they are considered as microplastic. Anything 5 to 24 is called the mesoplastic, and then macroplastic. Anything above 25 millimeters, which means 2.5 centimeters. Right? These are there are 2 types of microplastic, primary microplastic, that they are manufactured small, like these nurdles, and the others are the beads that you will see in some of your cosmetics. And the others are the secondary microplastics, where break down into smaller pieces. When they are break down into smaller pieces, we call them as the secondary microplastics. So all these are either different types of primary or secondary microplastics, different forms. You see the nanofibers or microfibers. This is quite often you see in for example, when you're washing your clothes in the washing machine, you will collect a lot of these nano and microfibers. Right? So the washing machine can be a very good source of microplastic. It's something you don't even think of. And other than that, even the tires, car tires, and then a lot of other material ended up in producing this plastic, microplastic. Even most of your cosmetics will have microplastics. As you can see, this some scrub used for cleanser, like washing your faces. They contain microbeads. Even toothpaste. Next time before buying, you can check whether any toothpaste, even they can contain that. I have shown some of the brand names even. I mean, there's no anything to hide because it's clearly mentioned in their ingredients. They have these things. Some of the brands, even some detergents, they have this microplastic. So before buying next time, I think better check these things. So now the question, a lot of people think whether this microplastic, when we consume, what will happen? So far, there's no much information actually. I mean, it is pretty sure that most of these microplastics are in the fish gut content. And if you remove the gut, usually most of the microplastic will be removed. But now the problem is that when the microplastic become nanoplastic, they're smaller and smaller. They can go to the bloodstream from the gut tissue to the bloodstream, and they can be in the other tissues as well, which means we are definitely, often definitely we are eating this plastic because it's salt, and most of our food items tested they contain microplastic. So, but the thing is whether they can get into our body tissues inside. So now it is proven that they can be in our body tissues as well. So it's going to cause a lot of issues in the future. The other issues with the plastics, especially with the nets, is like the entanglement of marine mammals and other organisms, even sharks. So quite often we get this kind of marine mammals entangled or sometimes ingested. Right. Another thing, like we already know about the ocean gyres. Right? There is some of this plastic being like accumulating in the ocean gyres. You remember last time I mentioned about the Great Pacific Ocean garbage patch? A huge amount of plastics being circulating in the Pacific Ocean. Luckily, in the Indian Ocean, there is no such garbage patch because of the oceanography. There is little different. For the moment, there is no such garbage patch, and it's very unlikely to have, but we don't know what happens in the future. That's what the prediction. So these are some of the nets. Can you imagine in the some of the volunteers that have been collected from the reefs? You can see tons of abandoned or lost fishing gear in the reefs. You can imagine how much damage they can do. So several garbage trucks of this the materials. They are extremely dangerous for the marine organisms. So that's where my major research interest is only this, actually on the plastic, where I have started with some of the projects in the Korean government. There was a collaboration. So I will start some plastic predator studies in the Nigam Lagoon. I will look at very different aspects, like from the surveys, questionnaire surveys, like the people surveys and underwater surveys, and also even the using technology like a side scan, sonar. Sonar were used to detect any plastic that we can't see. Right? And also we also having some collaboration with CSIRO, that's the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. It's a government institute in Australia. Do a lot of research. We had a collaboration, or we also so this is one of the opportunity that aquatic science students had. So you see all our aquatic students. We have some people from Bangladesh as well, and some Australians as well, so because of the collaboration. I think the aquatic student had a very good chance of joining this team. It's a global effort to estimate how much plastic is being taken into the sea. Actually, it's so unfortunate this situation now. Like we got the funding for to continue this project for the whole country, which you could have take part in this, right? But because of this present situation, we have an issue. But if any chance, I think you will be able to join with this team as a volunteer. you will be provided with all the facilities. But we are doing a survey for like a couple of weeks um, using a standard methodology. This is like it's a good chance to go around the country because it will cover whole country and the places we will never will have chance to go and never would have chance to go because some are extremely remote areas because these sites are designed by like mathematical models, the computer generated sites, so it will like spread over the whole country. And you have to use the GPS and go to the particular sites. Some might not have even access. You have to walk several kilometers sometimes. So it's a really good experience um, for anybody to have. So I hope in the future you will be able to join this team. Um, and yes, we talk about the issue of Sri Lanka becoming number 5. There is a problem with the data, but and that's why we have done a lot of research and even we have very good publications in one of the top journals in the world for marine pollution bulletin. Based on that study that we carried out, uh, very good research paper. You can read it for free. And now the COVID has brought another big issue with the plastic. There are a lot of single-use plastic being used with the COVID, and you know these things, so I don't want to explain. But this is something we never expected. So much of a single-use plastics that this is going to be a huge issue. And unfortunately, we as country, we don't have a proper plan to address this issue. Though we import so many of this kind of stuff, but we don't have a proper plan to dispose them. So that's going to be a huge issue in the future unless you do something now because we are using too much of these plastics, especially because of this COVID situation. Now, the other thing is we are extremely bad in, or we have extremely bad habit of using single-use plastic. Now we see now in the even in the university hostel canteens or the university canteens or from your even the like your birthday parties, wedding parties, funerals, everywhere the people use this the the plastic because you're so lazy to wash your plate and just use the plastic and then just throw it away just for a couple of minutes you throw it away and become a debris for like so many years. So that's why the plastic's not too bad, but especially the single use plastic you just use for a couple of minutes to understand that and then end that as a debris or waste. So these habits we have to change. Even I talk about this country, living in a tropical country with a lot of flowers, diverse things, but still we use the plastic or flowers and the grasses. This is how we use our common sense for decorations, right? Um, it's so unfortunate. This is becoming a huge issue now, and it's going to be because the other thing is these are very low cost material coming from mostly China. Most of the thing I think maybe they are coming from like a recycled material, extremely low quality, and then they will do a lot of damages to the marine environment. So you keep in mind, avoid these things all the time. You know, in the university, like in our surveys, in any activity that we do, we always do it as like a single-use plastic-free events. Even the like if you prepare a lunch, we will ask for like something uh, reusable or the biodegradable material. Everyone was given with a bottle, reusable bottle, a backpack, and then We won't use any water bottles, rather we use a refill bottles. Likewise, we try our best to have that single-use plastic-free events. So you can think of these things, but as I mentioned before, we have extremely bad habit of not properly managing our solid waste and ended up in this open dump yard, and they have a lot of chance to get into the waterways and eventually into the sea. So that's something we need to think very seriously. But we can't do it individual level, but we have to have strong policies. But individual level, even you have this kind of a waste collection bins. You see a lot of people just throw outside these bins because they are so lazy to even put this waste into that bin. I have seen in many beaches they have this waste bins, right? But outside the waste bin you have all the waste. Just inside you have just couple of waste. We are so lazy. We are so irresponsible. That's why the foreigners coming here, they are so upset about the situation. Why these local people with all these beautiful beaches, with a lot of resources, but they don't care about this. But they, as foreigners, they come here, they do this cleanup. It's so unfortunate. I have seen some tourists fighting with the local men and women because they have seen that throwing this plastic into the sea. They come here and they blame our people. You are destroying your own ocean. It's so unfortunate, right? So we have to think a lot. We are very unscientific, right? We as country, we talk a lot about the country. We think we talk that we love our country, but in reality we don't. And we just talking. We don't have the actions. It's so unfortunate. Okay, so there are some material that can be recycled. That something has to be think of, but not all the material that can be recycled, and especially we don't have a proper mechanism to what we call the waste segregation. You have to segregate, but there are some in the like in the Colombo now. They have some segregation method, but that they are also not very effective. Like in the house, they are ask us to segregate, but sometimes they end up in the same junkyard at the end, which has no much meaning. Right? So, but some provincial councils they do. Now the other things. Now we talk about this what we call the uh, environmental friendly plastic, right, or biodegradable plastic, but be careful. I mean, they are not really biodegradable. Right? There are different type of. Some are compostable. You can make it into a compost. But the thing is, these compostable plastic they won't become compost in just in the open dump yard, but they need to have a proper facility to make this compostable. Right. So in the proper composting facility, they will be the others are this biodegradable. Most of them are like this, though we call them as biodegradable, they're not really biodegradable. They will break into small pieces, eventually become microplastics. They are most actually bio-based or bioplastics. It may be made from corn or other starch because made of bio doesn't mean that they are biodegradable. So most of the material actually is kind of biodegradable material which we have to avoid. We have so many options that we can think of to avoid the using single-use plastics. That's something you have to think of. Always say no to the single-use plastic. You can use. I think we have discussed these things even previously. You can use things, the reusable things, most of the cases where you can avoid, like even if you get a yogurt, of course you can't avoid the container, but at least you can say no to the spoon, the plastic spoon, you just throw it away. I mean, especially if you are bringing it home, you don't need it there. You can say, you can refuse, which I always do. Right. We talk about the cleanups. It's good, but the problem is they don't do much other than keeping the beaches cleaner. But the thing is, it's not a long-lasting solution. The It will keep on adding more plastic in the future. Right. Even the underwater cleanups sometimes organized, which is good at least to clean up these things. But these are all temporary solution. But these kind of like ocean traps, the plastic traps, they are very good something to think of. Uh, like here in the Dehiwala Canal, they have this kind of a, it's called the ocean strainer to stop plastic going into the sea. If someone can do these kind of projects, very important that if someone to follow, right? Okay, likewise, we can do many things to address the issue with the plastic. Now, one thing that when we're doing some research on the plastic, we understood that some plastic can be cause another issue. It's the that can harbor some or they can carry some species, living species, as you can see from these images. When we were doing plastic surveys, we observed that these kind of living organisms even floating with plastic. So now plastic can be even source of spreading invasive species. So that's where actually my major research interest, even we were working on the marine invasive species. Actually, sorry, I did most of the research on this invasives in the marine environment, mainly from the ship-based marine invasions. As you can see, they can cause huge issues in the ships alone before becoming invasive species. They can cause a lot of damages to ship. With this much of a fouling, what's called biofouling, the efficiency of the decline drastically, and maybe they will be ended up in using a lot of fuel because the increase in resistance. And also, of course, they will cause the invasive species can be carried. And I don't know whether you have heard about something called the ballast water. And the biofouling is the phenomenon like here, but the ballast water, I will come to that one. They can be a source of spreading invasive species. Here you can see the how the invasive species can spread and how they can cause issues in the marine environment, like even in the ships and like water intakes, like cooling water intakes, they can be totally blocked by this invasive species. Here you see the ballast water. You know, if you have ever been to a boat, a small boat, you know, you have to balance the boat. Like if there is 5 or 7 people in the boat, you have to like the boatman will move you around to balance. Right, the skinny ones and the fatty ones will be balanced. Eventually, you have to balance the boat. But in a huge ship like this, you can't do this kind of thing. So that's how they balance. It's like in the ships are double hull, but in between the hull there are water tanks. Right. By removing, there are several water tanks around the ship. By removing or adding water into these tanks, they balance the boat. If the one side is like heavier, so you can remove from the water from that side or add water to the other side. Likewise, you have to balance. So that is what we call the ballast water. So you usually take the sea water. Now the problem is you take seawater from Sri Lanka and when you go to the India, in the next time when you are loading or unloading, you have to either remove the ballast water in there in the India, right? It can be a source of this invasive species to that port, or the vice versa from India to Sri Lanka. But since we are in the like nearby, usually the species may be common, but someone like from the Pacific, perhaps from the other ocean, would be really dangerous. So it is invasive species. It's a huge issue. There are so many species have been recognized, as a global invasive species, which can cause a lot of issues in the marine environment. You might have seen this kind of notice. Did you found this species? Anytime if you report this species, you have to notice to the government officials because they can be extremely dangerous. Right? So biofouling is a serious issue that we need to think of and going to be a huge issue, especially for the marine environment. They are the species that attach to the hull or the any underwater structures. Right? So all these images actually we took during our surveys. So these are the things that you will see in the ships or other underwater structures. Some are like bryozoans to acidians and tube worms, likewise the barnacles, and then likewise. So they can lot of issues in the biofouling can cause ecological impacts because they can be invasive species and they can compete our national or the indigenous species. They can carry like some disease causing like cholera, vibrio cholerae or some disease causing bacteria or virus even. And they can cause a lot of economic damages like if the ship is too much having too much biofouling, they have the fuel use to be increased, maybe even up to 30%. So that is a huge cost. And sometimes if the port environment's going to have invasive species, they have to close down the ports for cleanup. It's going to be a huge cost. So imagine if the Colombo port is going to close for a week or two, you can't imagine, you won't have food to eat. Right? So it can cause a lot of issues in the marine environment and also the invasive species. Right? So now the biofouling and the biosphere is one of the major pathways or the major ways of getting in marine in non-indigenous species or likely to cause invasive, right? So that is going to be a big issue in the future, something to think of. Now, we as a country have a huge issue because we are in the right in the east-west shipping route. Right? You see, we are in a shipping highway, very lot of oil and other stuff from west to east or even east to west. You see, in a single moment around Sri Lanka, how many ships going around right? In one time, in a single snapshot, so many ships around the country. So that's why we need to prepare a lot for this kind of a situation. Like what happened, the experts, because we are not well prepared for this kind of situation. We have to expect because we have high potential to have this kind of issue, right? That's we need to prepare for these things. So that's why I mentioned a lot of my previous students work on this marine invasions. He is now working on the NARA actually after working on. She's already got a PhD. She worked under my supervision on the same bioinvasion. She got even PhD now working in the University of Colombo as an academic after doing her PhD in our university. So there are some lot of chances, right? So we even studied like what we call the ecological succession, like putting plates, how the organism can attach to the plate, what for the succession. A blank plate, after several years, how they become, how the species can get into these plates. This kind of studies we have done. So all these are actually images, our own images from our research. Like after several years, we see how many species and how they can go in our. And we have recorded many global invasive species right in our ports. All these are actually globally invasive. In the global invasive list, these species. So there are so many things to think of in the future. And then we have some publication on these aspects as well in the very important international journals. This is actually one of our undergraduate, the one I talked about before from Nara. So his undergraduate research was published in one of the international journals. So you can still do some high impact research even your undergraduate level. So, okay, the other issues are in the sensitive coastal environment, like in the coral reefs. This is what usually we call the coral reefs. They are extremely beautiful, very diverse, very attractive, but the actual situation, this is how our coral reefs look now. In reality, as they are either dead, they are bleached, or even covered with the algae. Right? There is little chance for corals to survive. In this case, you see, the whole reef has been replacing, or it's being replaced by the algae, and that is so unfortunate. Right? So this is the situation. Is most of the reef in Sri Lanka now, Bar Reef, the Unawatuna, Kayankan, Talavila, that's in the between the Palau, Rumasada. There is no actually reefs. There are Pigeon Island. There are some reefs in this area. Right? So this is some of the underwater surveys that we have done. Right? So we have even tried some like replanting. There are a lot of trials for replanting, but there are issues because since there is some issue for coral to die, even if you replant, they're still going to die. So there's a problem with that. And then we have several marine protected areas, few marine protected areas. We should have more. And in the map on your right, you should be where the coral reefs are, or at least where the coral reefs were. Right around the country, there are so many coral reefs. Even in the northern region, there are a lot of coral reefs in these areas, which has not been mapped even. But most of the coral reefs are dying. Though we have some protected areas, like in the Hikkaduwa, there is no coral left in this. It's a marine protected area, is still there, but there's no corals. So this is there have been some what is called the heat waves or El Nino events, especially in 1990. There has been what we call the heat wave, the high temperature waves right in the Asia Pacific region, especially in the Southeast Asia. Majority of the corals were died during that time, 1998. See, before 1998, most of the reef has been very healthy right around the country, but you see now most of the corals in Sri Lanka are dead or degraded. Only few corals survive now. So that's something to think of if anyone interested in working on coral reefs. It's very important that because perhaps you will be the last generation to see coral reefs live in the ocean. So that is the situation. As you can see, the coral sometimes have to fight hard with the algae, where the algae, most of the time they will win, and the whole reefs will be converted into a algal reef. One stable environment changing into another stable environment, because these species they can stand the environmental changes. These species, like most are pollutant resistant species, this environment will be more stable now, but they are less diverse, but still they are stable. So that's what happening in the, now we call this as the regime shift for the one ecosystem. The coral ecosystem is changed into a algal ecosystem. One ecosystem changed to another ecosystem. The whole ecosystem changed. With that, the species, the diversity, everything change. So this kind of environment will support a different type of species than this one. So that's something that we need to think of, right? And this is these are some of the like comparisons, how the Bar Reef Sanctuary, like when I was when I first joined the university as a lecturer, actually, I took the first year oceanography, student for oceanography class into this Bar Reef. It's the very first batch of ocean, the aquatic science student. That time, the Bar Reef was like this. It was very diverse, beautiful coral reefs, and early this year, even with the COVID, we went there for a survey, and this is how it looked like now. There are still some beautiful fish, but there is no coral. It's all dead. So unfortunate. And the other issues, what we call eutrophication, it's another huge issue that we are talking about, especially in the Indian Ocean. We surrounded by a lot of agricultural countries, putting a lot of nutrients, right? Like us, we put too much of fertilizers without any control, and ended at the end they are ended up in the ocean through the rivers. And extremely bad is excess nutrient going to cause algal blooms and result in eutrophication. Now this will be lead to us what we call the oxygen, low oxygen areas, we call the hypoxia. Now this is a serious case. And another thing is the nutrients are extremely bad for coral reefs. You know that there is a, as I mentioned before, there's a battle between coral and the algae, because both are in the tropical waters. Throughout the year you have the sunlight. When the nutrients are enough, then there is more favorable for the algae to grow, because we have the nutrients and the sunlight. That's what the plant need. But the difference is that the tropical waters, there's less nutrient. Because less nutrient, that's why the coral has chance to survive than the algae. But now we changing that, we providing the nutrient or excess nutrient, even now we making the environment favorable for plant. Right? So you don't have to think anything further, because we are providing nutrients means the algae has more chance to survive in the marine environment than coral. This what we call the regime shift. We are part of the culprit, actually putting too much nutrient, so it's extremely bad. And which concept previously discussing about is the marine hypoxia. That's the oxygen depleted areas. If it is less than 2, we call it the hypoxia. The other one is the anoxia. If there is no zero oxygen, means the anoxia. And that's because of the eutrophication. There are a lot of records of marine hypoxic areas, like the records of this kind of a dead, we call the marine hypoxia also dead zone, because the animals in that area will be totally lost or dead because of this hypoxia. So if there is no oxygen, everyone else is going to die. Even in Sri Lanka, around Sri Lanka, there were some cases of like these kind of situations. Even in the lagoons, can be hypoxia. Right, so that's something to think of. And the other issues like the fisheries, something we have to discuss in detail. We will discuss this thing later in your second year, third year. But these are huge issues. We are like bulldozers in the terrestrial environment. Like we are destroying the whole marine habitat. You won't notice anything from the above. Everything is covered under the water, but you see the mud trails that you can see in the bottom, they are taken from the satellite images. The mud trails are because of these using this what you call the bottom trawling. Extremely dangerous for the ocean bottoms. Right. So most of our fish populations are going down, especially the big predatory fish like the yellowfin tuna, the cod. Um, Many species are losing, and there is a prediction now. This is the situation. The global fisheries is going down. This is where now we are. Right, about 2048, just before 2050, actually there won't be any fish left in the ocean. Right. So imagine you don't have many years to go. Less than 20 years. Actually, it's within 17 years we will lost all the fish that in the ocean. Imagine what will happen. Right. And rising temperatures, we're talking about these things. They are so causing a lot of issues in the marine environment. Something to think of seriously. Is increasing temperature, especially in the tropics. And that's why our coral reefs are dying, because the temperatures are increasing, and that effect is immediately seen in the tropics. This is already warm. A little bit warm means it's extremely warm for the tropical waters, and that will be a really big issue for the marine environment. And the other big issue that now scientists are talking about, the ocean acidification, OA, or the ocean acidification, something that we didn't think of earlier, and even few years back, even I thought like, oh, it's not going to be a big issue. For like a century, you will increase like the pH decrease will be like a few points, but even a smallest change, there are going to be huge issues, like especially the ocean acidification. A little bit of acidity in the ocean can be extremely corrosive for calcium carbonate structures. So now again, the immediate impact will be the corals. They are already dying, but the smallest change in the acidity will cause huge issue in the corals. They're extremely corrosive. And like other calcium carbonate bearing organisms, they all will be like a chance of dissolving or corroding their shells. So which means in the future you will have the prawns and crabs without shells. And theoretically we can call like that. So you can directly eat a prawn and crab. They might not have even the carapace. So that's something you have to think of. Now the problem with the ocean acidity is that there is a disproportionate impact of acidity on different organisms, because for some species it's extremely dangerous or extremely harmful, whereas it should be favorable for some species. Like it is extremely bad for some fish and coral, but it will be very good for jellyfish. Bad for fish, good for jellyfish, which means you will have more jellyfish in the future than fish, because that's the favorable environment. But extremely corrosive for the corals. You see, increasing acidity will end up in even the remaining corals to die. And these are the predictions, like how it happens, how the impact of changes in the pH. Right. So all these things are due to the carbon chemistry. That's why we have to study the carbon chemistry, because we are adding carbon dioxide, it become carbonic acid, and if you keep on adding a lot of carbon dioxide, and there's the buffer action won't work anymore, and then you have more carbonic acid. Usually, it like a breakdown again, or they are combined to become or breakdown and it's balanced. But in this case, you'll have more carbonic acid, which means it's more acidic. Right, so that's going to happen in the future. So it's extremely bad for the corals and also the shell-bearing organisms like these. So they are like a part of the marine food webs. It's very right. So other than that, there are the the marine environmental polluting situation, like even the oil explorations are on the way, already done. Actually, there is a plan for oil exploration in Sri Lanka in the near future. Oil exploration is already done. Production level, they're thinking of now, like especially in the Gulf of Mannar. Now we have found the area with the oil through a survey. Actually, this is during the exploration of that oil in the Gulf of Mannar. Actually, in this photograph you see me long time ago. I had the chance to go to this when these explorations are there. Right, so this will keep on adding other dimensions, other issues in the future, because the oil going to cause a lot of issues in the marine environment. It's not only just the exploration, but just the oil accident. But you look at this graph, right? Most of us think that the major source of oil to the marine environment is from the accidental spills, accidental oil spills. But look at this one. The majority of oil in the marine environment actually come from river runoff, which means the oil going from your kitchen, service station, or your factory from the terrestrial environment. So the tank operation and tank accidents actually is very low compared to the other issues. So that's something to think of. We have extremely vulnerable because of the shipping route. We are very close to this shipping route, and we have a lot of tendency to have this kind of accident anytime. So we need a lot of preparations. There have been a lot of oil tankers has been damaged. Even very recently, there was some small accident, but if it is a large scale damage, the whole marine environment around the country, and it will take a couple of hours to wrap around the country. Since our coastal environment is extremely sensitive, it's going to cause a lot of issues. Like this is the Action Walters sometime back, so many years back. This is the largest oil spill by a ship, but like breaking into two some of the ships. And of course, this is not in Sri Lanka, but in the world. Right. So these issues are there, and we have to prepare for, like, we need to get ready for this kind of situations. We need a lot of preparation to fight in this kind of a situation, and if there is oil spill, right? And since we have a lot of development works around the country, we need to do a lot of marine environmental assessment. We are not very much interested on this subject, but I have involved in a lot of this kind of marine environmental assessment, how this development work affect the marine environment. But the problem is we cannot avoid developments. We need development as well. So that's why we have to balance between the development and the environment, which always there is a trade-off, which means there are some benefit from, but also we're going to lose something as well from all these projects. And then that's one of the reasons we have started a research center in a small scale within the university. You haven't got chance to come to the universities, unfortunately, but we have something called Center for Marine Science Technology, where we have a lot of, not a lot actually, few collaborations, and also we're doing some research. Which anybody, not anybody, though several of you interested, you can join with our research groups. Some collaboration, as I mentioned before, with the CSIRO and Taiwan University, where we do some collaborative research. Even we have collaboration to GOA, that's the Global Ocean Acidification Observation Network. So we're going to have some of the observation, monitor these things in the future. But the thing is, we're talking about a different form of carbon. I don't know if you have heard about that. 4 different types of carbon. called the brown carbon, the black carbon, the green carbon, and the blue carbon. Brown carbon actually that's the, the carbon dioxide emission from the some of the human activities, usually in the industrial release of carbon dioxide. The black carbon are the partially combusting or incomplete combusting carbon, like in the tar, which is like a black smoke. These are black carbon. Then you have the green carbon, that's the carbon stored in the plant. Now, the fourth type is the blue carbon, that's the carbon that carbon actually stored in the marine and coastal ecosystem or marine habitat, marine organisms. Now, we talk about something we call the blue carbon because these blue carbon resources, the marine or coastal ecosystem, they can store carbon for quite longer period of time, perhaps even for like throughout the next generations, because especially in the seabed, you can store a lot of carbon dioxide, which will never return to the land. So that's where we think of a lot about this blue carbon, especially the mangroves and the seagrass beds. They can store so much of a carbon dioxide than the many terrestrial plants. So we call the carbon sequestration rate, or how much carbon dioxide they can store for and for how long. Like even the trees in the terrestrial environment, they can store carbon, but when they die, they will part of the ecosystem again and they will return. But some of the carbon that's stored in the marine environment, they will go to the marine sediment and will deposit in the deep ocean sometimes, and they will never return. So it's very important that marine environment has a carbon store for a long period of time to eliminate the carbon issue, the changing carbon chemistry. So that's why we have to study the carbon chemistry in the ocean, which would be really helpful. Now, what solutions are there? Especially we need a lot of protected areas, marine environment. Right? Usually called 20 to 50% of the marine environment has to be protected. But as per the global goals that the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, 10% of the marine environment has to be protected by 2030. 10% of the marine environment. So imagine, the Sri Lanka has less than 1% of the marine environment is protected. So to make it 10%, so the large area of the marine environment has to make it protected. But we are not no way there. So these are the things that we have to think of. Right? But even the protected areas, we have to even the size of the protected area, you have to be scientifically determined. Right? Not be too much for you at this stage, but we can discuss these things. But it's very important that we have marine protected areas. We call it as the hope spot. It's hope for that should be the only hope that we can have for the future, especially for the fisheries and marine organisms. We need to give fish a chance to breed or reproduce freely. Then only the fisheries and all the marine food will be functioning as usual. It's already been damaged. We have to think a lot on these issues, right? And so in the future, in the history, we talk a lot about the green, like everything to be green solutions. So for most of the environmental issues, we discuss about the green solutions. But now we have to think in the more blue. You have to be more blue, which means earlier is the terrestrial environmental friendly, which means green, but that has to be more ocean friendly as well. I mean, it has to be blue friendly or the ocean friendly. That's why we have to think in the future, putting this together, right? right? So the blue-green friendly, right? It should be like anything that we are doing in the future, you have to be green friendly. That's the terrestrial environment friendly and also the ocean friendly, which is most of the cases neglected. It to be more ocean friendly, especially the use of plastics and many material. So you have to think of the ocean friendly or not. So it's something which means at the end it's a blue green. You have to think of a blue green environment into future, right? So and so we have to imagine of a blue green world in the future, right? So that's where, as I started in the beginning, the the whole the oceans is the only thing that we have to think of. Right? So if we are to be healthy, the ocean has to be healthy because the ocean, the future of the ocean and ours is the same. So that they have to think very seriously um, about the ocean. Right. So that's where in this lecture series, I try my best to give some understanding about the marine environment with a little bit of scientific background, which you might not had any chance to learn about the marine environment. But with this limited understanding, there are a lot of other things to learn as well. But with your little understanding, you can make the better decision in the future and to make the ocean better in the future. So at least I hope you got some idea and will not only study but will act, do some smaller thing that you can do to protect the marine environment as well. Right?